Late afternoon in Echo Ridge always carried a dim, fading light, but today it felt heavier, denser, as if it meant to press down on Calla Monroe's shoulders. Dust-laden wind swept across the road leading into the small square, where the whole town had gathered in a circle, waiting for a cheap spectacle they wouldn't have to pay for. Calla stood in the center of that ring, a black widow, her worn coat holding to a body thinned by months of strain. Her hands were clasped before her, fingers trembling beyond her control. She had lost count of how many nights she'd slept with the weight of debt crushing her, but none had ever felt as hopeless as this one. Townmaster Bowen stood on the wooden platform, his rough voice cutting through the air like a blade. Calla Monroe's forced labor contract will be auctioned publicly. Her husband's debt has exceeded any means of repayment. He swept his gaze across the crowd, trying for stern authority, but the satisfaction in his eyes was plain. A man let out a sharp laugh, metallic as a snapped knife. "Never thought we'd get to choose Miss Monroe like this." Raspy laughter followed, mixed with prying stares. They saw her not as a person, but as something placed on a market stall for the taking. Calla bit her lip until it bled. Tears fell, yet she refused to bow her head. She had long known that one bowed head was all they needed to believe they had truly broken her. She kept her back straight, even as her chest tightened with a shame she could not name. Bowen struck the gavel. "Opening bid at $10. A shrill voice rose at once. "30. It was Madame Lee, the brothel keeper known for her ruthlessness. A chill shot down Calla's spine. No, not her. 40, a drunken man added. 50. 60. The world blurred around her. Her heart hammered hard against her ribs. She fought for breath, but every shouted number felt like a noose tightening. If Madame Lee won, her life was finished. 90! Madame Lee's voice cut clean through the noise. Silence fell. Most of the men stepped back, none of them foolish enough to challenge her. Calla's hands whitened as she clenched them. She thought of God, of her mother, of herself. But nothing held long enough to steady her against the drop opening beneath her feet. Then, just as Bowen lifted the gavel to close the bid, a man's voice rose from the back of the crowd. Low, firm, cold enough to halt the air itself. 150! Every head turned. Calder Wright stepped forward. Tall, broad-shouldered, his features worn by mountain sun and wind. His green eyes did not waver, as though he cared little who watched him. Only the dry dust on his boots marked each heavy step as he moved ahead. Bowen swallowed hard. "Mr. Wright, I mean her contract," Calder said, quiet but clear. Then he set a pouch of money on Bowen's table. The sharp clatter of coins echoed through the stunned stillness. Madame Lee pressed her lips thin but said nothing. No one in Echo Ridge was reckless enough to bid against Calder Wright, the man from the valley's edge, silent but carrying a weight that made the whole town wary. Bowen struck the gavel. Calla Monroe's labor contract goes to Calder Wright. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Calla remained still, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Calder turned to her. His gaze met hers. Not possessive, not appraising like the others, but something steady, quiet, almost respectful. He didn't reach for her. He simply stepped close enough for her to hear his voice. "Don't be afraid. I'll explain." Calla stood frozen, her chest tightening in a way she couldn't understand. Saved? Or stepping into a new kind of chain? She didn't know. But Calder Wright's eyes, green, steady, without judgment, held her long enough that she couldn't look away. And their story began at the very moment an afternoon that seemed ready to strip her of everything instead changed the course of her life. The diner on the edge of Echo Ridge was quieter than usual, lit only by a soft gold glow slipping through a dust-fogged window. Calla sat close to the wall, careful not to let her back touch the chair, her hands folded in her lap, as if afraid they might betray the thin calm she still held. She kept her eyes on the man who had saved her from humiliation in the square, Calder Wright. He sat across from her, his shadow stretched across the wooden table like a line drawn between what she understood and what she could not yet name. Calder did not speak at once. He drew a folded sheet from his coat pocket and set it on the table. "Your contract," he said, voice low and plain. "Bowen signed it. It belongs to me now." Calla tightened her hands. A thin piece of paper, able to alter a whole life. So now, her throat felt scraped dry. What am I supposed to do? Calder studied her for a moment. Then he slid the plate aside, set 2 fingers on the edge of the contract, and tore it in half, then smaller still, until the pieces fell across the table like dry petals. "I bought the contract so I could destroy it," he said, quiet but sure. Calla sat still, her heart thudding like a child trying to make sense of a miracle. Freedom. The word was so distant, she hardly dared believe she could touch it. "Why?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "You don't know me. You don't know what I've been through." Calder leaned back slightly. His stern features eased, just a fraction. "I know injustice when I see it." He paused, his green eyes dimming as if reaching toward an old shadow. "My family was forced into labor once. No one stepped in. Folks thought it was normal." Then he looked straight at her. "I can't watch that happen again." Calla lowered her gaze, tears slipping free without warning. Not from weakness, but because it had been so long since anyone offered her a reason that wasn't tainted by hidden intent. Calder handed her a glass of water. When she reached for it, the back of her hand brushed his fingers. A quick, soft touch, light as breath, yet enough to make her flinch, pulling away out of instinct born from too many violations. Calder withdrew at once, eyes lowering in a wordless apology. "I didn't mean to frighten you." Calla drew a steady breath, reminding herself this was not a man who had come to take anything from her. She said softly. "Thank you." A gentle stillness settled between them. Outside, the town's lamps flickered to life, but inside the diner, it felt as if the two of them stood on the edge of a decision neither could fully grasp. Calder broke the quiet first. "Do you have anywhere to go?" Calla shook her head. Her house was seized, her kin far or gone. She had nothing left but the clothes on her back and a shred of dignity that had kept her standing through the day. "I have a ranch in Northwind Valley," Calder said. "Wide and quiet. Need a housekeeper for the cooking. And," he paused, "I need someone to manage my records. There's too much work for 2 hands." Calla frowned. "You're offering me a job?" "If you want it." His tone held no pressure, only the sense of a door opening in a dark night. Calla weighed it. Work was better than being thrown into a brothel, better than being auctioned like a life with no worth. And Calder's eyes, though steady, did not look at her as a commodity. "I'll do it," she said, soft but firm. Calder nodded, not triumphant, not relieved, simply accepting, as if he had trusted her answer long before she spoke it. When they left the diner and stepped onto the main street, Calla felt the town's eyes follow her. Some whispered, some pitied, most pride. Calder slowed his pace, placing himself between her and the world. Calla could not guess where her path now led, but when Calder tipped his head toward the waiting wagon, she knew her life had shifted the moment he stepped out of the crowd. A chapter had closed, and a new one, though she scarcely dared believe in it, had begun. They left Echo Ridge the next morning, just as the sun rose over the eastern ridge. Mist still blanketed the valley, softening the world as if the land were breathing out a long, pale sigh. Calla rode Calder's brown horse, gentle but strong, while he walked beside her, holding the reins of his own mount, his steps steady as though the road lived in his memory. The trail into Northwind Valley was no easy path. It cut through old pines, slipped between sheer cliffs, and narrowed in places so much that one misstep meant falling into the ravine below. Calla had never traveled this far from town, and her heart pulled tight each time the wind howled past her ear. Calder said little, but whenever her horse stumbled on a root or dipped into soft earth, his hand was already on the reins before her, steadying the beast. "Easy," he said, the single word quiet as water sliding over stone, then withdrew his hand at once. Calla noticed. He never touched longer than needed, never stood too close. Only enough to keep her from falling, never enough to make her feel cornered. Some men spent a lifetime learning how to honor distance. Calder seemed born with the understanding. By noon, they stopped beside a slender creek. Sunlight broke through the branches and fell in scattered patches over the soft grass where they rested. Calder tossed her a share of bread and cold meat. Calla took it with some hesitation, but after the first bite, she realized she had been hungry since the night before and had been too wary to admit it. Calder sat at a careful distance, far enough that the wind passed cleanly between them. He removed his gloves and splashed water on his face. When he looked up, the light caught in his eyes, and Calla found herself watching longer than she meant to. The shape of a man built by mountain life was plain: strong jaw, straight nose, broad shoulders carrying more than just the cold. "Where are you from, Calla?" he asked, his voice low but gentle. She told him about Charleston, with its summers thick with bougainvillea, about her mother gone when she was young, and the man she once called husband before life tightened into a narrow, painful corner. Calder never interrupted. He nodded, held her gaze each time she faltered, as if showing she could continue if she wished. When he spoke of himself, Calder told her about Northwind Valley, how his father grew barley and his mother sang in the evenings. He said it in a tone steady and plain, without pride and without hiding. "My dream," he paused, then let a faint smile touch his mouth, "is to live quietly. Don't need much. Just enough." Calla let out a small laugh, so light she startled herself hearing it. The creek moved, leaves drifted, and Calder watched her a beat too long, as if pressing the rare sound into memory. By evening, they reached a small way station wedged between two cliffs. It held only a stable, a wooden overhang, and an old fire pit. Cold wind spilled down from the heights, making Calla shiver as soon as she dismounted. Calder saw it at once. Without a word, he opened his saddlebag, drew out a thick ash-gray coat, and set it gently across her shoulders. Calla froze. There was nothing demanding in the gesture, only the simple consideration of a man unused to showing anything but sincerity. And that simplicity made her chest shift in an odd, unsteady way. "Nights get cold here," he said. You'll need something warm. Calla held the coat, still carrying a trace of his body's heat. Thank you, she murmured. They sat near the fire after Calder coaxed the old embers to life. Wind battered the overhang, wood cracked and popped in the dark, and the flames cast soft lines across Calder's face, easing the harshness daylight gave him. Calla watched him from the corner of her eye, quiet. Something in his silence made her feel safer than all the grand promises she had heard in her life. When she finally closed her eyes, Calla breathed one clear thought. This man, he is not like the others. Northwind Valley came into view after a wide bend in the road, opening before Calla like a scene shaped by wind and light. Fields of barley stretched under the afternoon sun, soft as a gold blanket laid across the valley floor. Beyond them rose moss-covered mountains, silent as old watchmen. At the heart of it all stood Calder Wright's ranch. Not grand in any boastful way, but firm and steady, much like the man himself. Calla said nothing for a moment. She simply looked. The quiet beauty eased something inside her, as if life, after years of hard winds, had suddenly offered her a path she had not dared to imagine. Calder stopped his horse and lifted a hand. Northwind Ranch. Not perfect, but it's home. From a distance, a few men stacking hay looked up. No whispers followed, no probing stares like in Echo Ridge. They nodded to Calder, and one tipped his hat to Calla. A quiet, simple respect, something she could not recall the last time she'd been given. The old housekeeper left last week, Calder explained as they dismounted. Martha has handled things for now. She's waiting for you. Martha stepped out from the kitchen door. A woman in her 50s, hair tied back, smile warm, but eyes sharp enough to read worry on another's face. She hurried over and took Calla's hands in both of hers. You must be Calla. The road's been long. Come in, have some soup, warm yourself. The word child rose naturally from her, and it made Calla's throat tighten. Calder stayed behind, letting the women go ahead. Something in the way he kept his distance struck Calla. Not coldness, but a quiet respect, as if he knew she needed space to breathe after so much upheaval. Calla's cabin stood a short walk from the main house, tucked beneath old pines. Inside was small but warm, a single wooden bed, a low shelf, a window looking out over the creek that traced the valley. Calla touched the lilac quilt folded at the foot of the bed, stitched with wildflowers. A woman had once lived here. The soft threads, a forgotten ceramic cup on the shelf, the faint scent of lavender in the wood. It felt strange, stepping into someone's past, and at the same time feeling as if she had found the first place that might belong to her. This was my sister's room, Calder said from the doorway, his voice dropping slightly. She married and moved south. I kept things as she left them. Calla turned. His gaze held on her face for a moment longer than usual, before shifting toward the wall, as if trying not to impose. If anything doesn't suit you, tell Martha. He stepped back so she would not feel observed. But as she rearranged the notebooks on the shelf, she still felt the faint brush of his attention. Not intrusive, only checking that she was all right. Work began the next day. Calla learned to tend the stove, prepare breakfast for the workers, manage the storeroom, keep the accounts. Her hands no longer trembled the way they had when she left Echo Ridge. Martha taught her how to sort barley, how to read the ledgers, and how to bake bread crisp on the outside and soft within. This place needs a tidy mind, Martha said. You fit better than you think. Calla only smiled, but inside her rose a small, steady light, the feeling of being useful, being seen. Calder appeared at unexpected moments throughout the day, often to collect reports or ask about the ledgers. He always kept 2 or 3 steps between them. Yet each time Calla looked up, his eyes were already on her, quick enough that she might have dismissed it if she were not paying attention. One afternoon, when she set a freshly cleaned ledger on his desk, Calder reached to take it and brushed the tips of her fingers. A light touch, but enough to draw a sudden breath from her. Calder paused too, his green eyes softening for a heartbeat before he pulled back, careful as a man afraid to break something fragile. "Thank you," he said, his voice lower than usual. That first night in the cabin, Calla lay listening to the creek outside. The water rose and fell like a song without words. Shadows crossed the ceiling in quiet shapes, and the stillness felt so deep she hardly knew how to hold it. Safety, she had never expected to feel it again. Yet tucked inside the peace was a thin, trembling fear. Fear it might all be a dream. Fear life would turn on her once more. In the dark, Calla pulled the quilt to her chest and closed her eyes. Northwind Valley breathed slow beyond her walls, and inside her, something slow and new began to breathe as well. Life in Northwind Valley moved with a plain, steady rhythm. The sound of saws each morning, milk cows calling for feed, Martha chiding the young ranch hands with fond impatience. Calla slipped into that rhythm as if she had belonged to it far longer than the few short weeks she'd been there. Her first evening at the main house table, Calder sat at the head. Martha carried dishes from the kitchen, and Calla sat across from him. No one spoke much, but now and then Calla's eyes met Calder's, quiet as still water, before both looked down again, each hiding a thought neither dared name. In the days that followed, they spoke of the harvest, Calder asking about her new way of keeping records, Calla suggesting a better arrangement for the grain stores. He listened as if her opinion held true weight, not as the word of a woman delivered here by circumstance. Whenever they exchanged ledgers, their hands brushed for a fleeting beat. Calla pulled back slightly in shy reflex. Calder only breathed a shade slower. Calla began to open like a summer bloom, shoulders straighter, steps lighter, her voice warming. Martha noticed first. "You're smiling with your eyes now," she said, handing Calla a basket of red apples. Calla lowered her gaze. "It's easier to breathe here." Martha only smiled, though her eyes held quiet blessing. Calder noticed too. He caught the small shifts, how Calla twisted the corner of her apron when she concentrated, how she tucked a loose strand behind her ear when she read the ledgers, how the afternoon light rested on her skin like warm honey. Each detail made him pause longer than he meant to. Then the storm rolled in on a windless afternoon. Dark clouds gathered over the Northwind peaks like a warning. "We need to get the calves in before the rain breaks," Calder said, striding into the yard. They had barely started when hooves thundered toward them. A young man from the neighboring ranch, blood streaking his brow, nearly fell out of his saddle. "There's been an accident. Wagon overturned in the ravine," he gasped. Calder caught him and carried him inside. "Calla, help me." She ran to them without hesitation. The hands that once trembled beneath shame steadied with purpose. She pressed a clean cloth to the gash, her touch sure, her voice calming, her movements as if she had tended wounds all her life. For a moment, Calder forgot even the thunder cracking overhead. He watched Calla and saw, for the first time, not the woman he had rescued, but someone who could stand firm in a storm without faltering. That night, the storm tore through the valley. Wind screamed across the roofs, windows shuddered against the gusts. The injured man, Evan, groaned under fever. Martha brewed herbs, while Calder and Calla took turns cooling his brow and steadying him when he thrashed in dreams. Each time Calla leaned close to Evan, Calder felt something tighten deep inside. Not jealousy, but the sharp truth that he cared for her more than he had allowed himself to admit. Near midnight, while Martha went to fetch more herbs, only two remained in the room. Lamplight warmed Calla's face. A bead of sweat slid down her cheek, bright as dew. "You're tired," Calder said, voice low and softer than usual. Calla shook her head. "If he wakes alone, he'll be afraid." Calder met her dark eyes, filled with strength and with a quiet fragility that stirred something he wasn't ready to name. A lightning flash tore open the sky, lighting the room just as Calla lifted her face. Their breaths brushed, close enough to tremble. Calder reached out, almost instinctively, his fingers grazing the line of her jaw. Calla didn't pull away. She didn't lean in either. She simply stayed. The moment stretched long enough for them to hear their own hearts. Calder leaned closer, breath mingling with hers. Then he stopped, halted as if something unseen had caught his wrist. "Not tonight," he said, almost like a vow spoken into the dark. Calla nodded. No hurt, no disappointment, only a look of understanding warm enough to break a man open. The storm raged outside, but in that small room something had sparked, small as flint against stone, yet strong enough to alter the course of a life. After the storm, Northwind Valley returned to its steady rhythm. Evan, the injured young man, had passed the worst of it. Each day he grew stronger, and when he finally managed to walk with crutches, the whole ranch breathed easier. Calla felt herself settling as well. In the 3 weeks she'd spent at Northwind, she had lived, worked, laughed, and at times forgotten the humiliation that had driven her from Echo Ridge, but not forgotten the man who had stepped through the crowd that day, who had seen her when the world saw only something to be sold. That afternoon, Calder stood at the kitchen door, hat in hand, his voice low yet softened in a way she rarely heard. "Calla, tonight I'd like to take you to town for supper. Not for business. Just to thank you for what you did during the storm." Calla looked at him, surprised by such open sincerity. I'd like that," she said, flustered, though her smile rose without her noticing. Northwind Hollow lay low in the valley, no more than a single road lined with lamplight. The small eatery in the center glowed warm, banjo music drifting from the back. Calder chose a table by the window. He was never a man of many words, but tonight his silence seemed gentler, clearing space for Calla to speak of things she had never imagined sharing. They talked about Martha's meals, sometimes overcooked but always good, about Evan's habit of snoring, about the day Calla nearly tipped a whole crate of apples onto Calder in the storeroom. They laughed, unforced, unguarded. Midway through the meal, Calder looked at her fully. "Calla, when you smile, this valley brightens." She looked away, though a quiet curve touched her lips. A part of her, one long told she did not deserve much, trembled as if brushed by warm wind. On the way back, rain began to fall unexpectedly. Not heavy, just a fine, silken rain drifting from the peaks. Calder pulled the reins and nodded toward his small hunting cabin near the turnoff. "We'll shelter there. This won't pass soon." The wooden cabin was simple but warm, smelling of dried pine and old leather. Calla stood near the small stove, rubbing her hands against the chill. Calder stepped forward and laid his coat around her shoulders. "It's colder in here. Keep it on." When he drew the collar closer around her neck, the space between them shrank to a single breath. Calla looked up, and his gaze, green and steady, no longer avoided hers. "Calla," he said quietly, like a man stepping into a place he wasn't sure he was allowed. "I don't want you afraid of me. Not ever." She shook her head. "I'm not afraid of you. It's just, no one has ever treated me the way you do." Calder stepped back half a pace and sat near the stove, inviting her to join him. "If you want to speak of your past, I'll listen." It was the first time he called her you in the way a man speaks to someone close. And it fit, settling into taut place like a missing piece. Calla watched the firelight flicker. "My husband, before he died, he carried debts, anger, and the habit of cutting me down. Not always with blows, but with words that struck deeper. I began to believe I had no worth, that I was only a woman trailing behind someone else." Calder listened, without fixing, without interrupting, simply hearing her. When she finished, he spoke, voice steady as water sliding over stone. "You're stronger than you think. You stood straight when a whole town tried to shame you. You saved a man in a storm without hesitation. You deserve every good thing, Calla." Her tears came silently. Calder lifted a hand, hesitant, and touched her cheek as if afraid the touch itself might bruise. "I just want you to know, here, you don't have to brace yourself." In that moment, her defenses eased, slow as ice thawing. She placed her hand on his chest, over the steady beat of his heart. And he understood. They leaned toward each other, not driven, not hungry, just like two streams finally finding the same course. The first kiss light as breath. The first embrace unhurried, asking only, "Do you trust me?" Calla answered by resting her forehead against his. The door between two long-guarded hearts opened, without storm, without sound, only with a quiet surrender. That night, they found one another in gentle warmth, in meaningful touch, in the safe space neither had ever known. Not passion for its own sake, but the soft yielding of two souls long tightened by fear. No display, no reckless fire. Only two people finally believing they were worthy of being loved. As the fire dimmed, Calla rested against Calder's shoulder, his breath settling into a calm, even rhythm. In the thin dark, Calder whispered into her hair, "Calla, you are my home." And for the first time in her life, Calla believed she had a place to return to. Calla woke as early light slipped through the cracks of the hunting cabin. Calder's warmth still held around her, his hand resting lightly at her waist, his breathing steady as the valley floor beneath them. For a brief moment, she let herself remain in that circle of safety, wanting to believe the world could no longer reach her. But with the warmth came a flicker of fear, cold as a hand closing over her heart. Do I deserve this? Will he regret it? The questions rose from old habit, the habit of doubting her worth, shaped by years of being overlooked, dismissed, treated as something in another man's way. Calder shifted, waking. His green eyes, still softened by sleep, met her face. "Morning," he murmured, voice low as the fading night. She forced a small smile. "We should get back. Martha will worry." He studied her a moment, as if wanting to say more, then let it go. "All right, we'll go." Back at the ranch, everything looked as it always did, quiet, steady. But inside Calla, something had changed. She avoided Calder's eyes that morning, burying herself in kitchen work and ledgers so she wouldn't have to think about the night before. But avoidance didn't quiet anything. Calder, on the other hand, stepped toward her more than usual, He stopped by the kitchen, sat near her desk while she wrote, asked small questions, not intruding, but close enough that she knew he was trying, carefully, to meet her where she stood. Late in the day, as she brought him the reports, she paused at the doorway. "Calder, about last night. I don't want anyone to know." He set down his pen, looking at her so long she had to lower her gaze. "Why?" Because I am who I am. Because of my race. Because of my past. People will say things you'll have to bear." Calder rose, stopping one step away. "Calla, I don't care what they say. I care about you." She swallowed. "I need time." His eyes softened, and he nodded. "All right. I'll wait." 2 days later, Evan, the injured young man, was nearly well. Helping Martha wash dishes, he chatted easily with Calla. "You know," he said, "Mr. Calder once had a sweetheart in the town down the mountain. Folks say she wanted to come back after he built Northwind." Calla's hands stilled. "They saw each other again?" "Not sure." Evan shrugged. "Just know she was pretty. Came from a good family. Everyone thought they'd marry." His words were harmless, yet they landed in Calla like the first drop before a storm. A wealthy white woman who once wanted Calder, placed beside a black widow with a scarred past. Though Evan said nothing more, jealousy flared. New, sharp, frightening, striking places she thought long numb. She avoided Calder that day, avoided his searching looks, avoided the warmth she'd held only one night, but already feared losing. Later, sitting alone in her dim cabin, a knock sounded. "Calla?" Calder's voice. "I'm fine," she answered softly. "Just tired." He stood on the porch for a long moment before saying, "You don't have to be afraid of me. Whatever comes, I'm here." The door stayed closed, but his words slipped through the wood, touching a place she didn't know could still be reached. The next morning, as Calla checked the barley stores, Martha burst in with a letter in hand. "Calla, child, you've got mail from Denver." Calla wiped her hands on her apron and opened it. The instant her eyes found the first lines, her body wavered. Elias Monroe, her former husband, had resurfaced in Denver. The man she'd believed dead. The man who taught her to doubt her own worth. The man who could shatter the new life she had barely begun to hold. The letter slipped from her hand and touched the floor with a sound small as dust, yet it struck straight through her heart. The ghost of her past had found her. Calla sat still as carved wood as she read the letter a second time. The handwriting was rushed, uneven, as if the sender had wanted it in her hands at once, or as if it were a blade meant to cut into the life she had only just begun to build. Elias Monroe. The name she had tried to bury so deep, she sometimes believed she had forgotten its sound. But the letter was clear. Elias was alive. Not only alive, he had been arrested for a string of frauds and was now trying to drag Calla's name into the mess to bargain for a lighter sentence, claiming she had assisted him in old schemes. Calla heard the wind outside the window as a cold, hollow howl. Her body folded inward, memories flooding back. Nights Elias returned reeking of liquor and debt, words flung like blows, scars left where no one could see. She thought she had escaped all of it, but darkness never loosens its grip easily. Martha placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to go back into that past," she said gently. But Calla only shook her head, tears falling without a sound. An old fear, familiar as breath, tightened around her like rope. When Calder entered, one look at her face was enough. He didn't reach for the letter, didn't press her with questions. He sat beside her, letting the silence between them speak like an arm drawn around her. After a long while, Calla managed words. He's alive. Elias was arrested, and he's pulling my name into it. Calder leaned in, his gaze sharpening, though worry ran beneath it. What did he do to you before? Calla lowered her head, voice fragile as cracked earth. Words, sometimes worse than blows. He made me believe I was worth nothing. Calder didn't touch her, but his voice dropped into a low, steady chord he struggled to keep even. You're not going back to that. I'll go to Denver and handle this. Calla lifted her eyes, truly meeting his without the shield she often held. No, I have to go. I need to face the thing that frightened me all my life. Calder went quiet, then nodded, the respect in his eyes stronger than anything he could have said. Then we go together. They left Northwind Valley at first light. Mist blanketed the ground, horses pushing through silver layers thin as breath. The world was quiet enough that Calla could hear her own heartbeat. The road to Denver was long and cold. With each mile, Calla felt the past walking beside her, step by step, refusing to release its grip. She stayed silent for hours, eyes fixed on distant ridges, but seeing nothing. Calder didn't urge her to speak. He rode just half a horse's length from her, close enough she knew she wasn't alone, far enough she could breathe. When they stopped at a small creek, Calla stood at the water's edge, arms drawn tight to her body. I thought I was free, she whispered, voice breaking. But one letter, and everything comes back. Calder approached slowly. The past can return, but you aren't the same woman anymore. She looked up, her dark eyes blurred with fear. I'm afraid, if he looks at me, I'll become that weak woman he crushed. That was when Calder extended his hand, not demanding, not pulling, simply open, waiting. Calla stared at the hand for a long time, weighing whether she had the right to take it. Then she placed hers in his, a handhold in daylight, simple to most, felt to Calla like tearing open the dark. Calder closed his fingers around hers, his voice low as wind through pine. I'm here. Whoever you face, you won't face alone. For the first time, Calla believed him. Denver rose in the falling light, a larger, grayer city than she had ever imagined. The clatter of wagons, the churn of voices, the scent of smoke and metal, all of it struck her heartbeat into a hard, uneven rhythm. Calder set a hand at her back, light as a breath. We're here. You don't have to be afraid. Calla drew a long breath. Ahead stood the jailhouse where Elias was held. The past waited within. But this time, she was not walking into it alone. The Denver jail was colder than Calla expected. The smell of metal and damp stone clung to the air, and the echo of iron doors slamming shut rang like steel striking earth. As the guard led them down the corridor, Calla felt every pore on her skin tighten. Calder walked beside her, never touching, yet solid as a great tree trunk. Each step he took felt like a shield holding the cold and the old memories at bay. Visiting rooms at the end, the guard said, voice rough. Calla drew a long, steady breath. I'm here, Calder murmured, just for her. She nodded, then stepped inside. Elias Monroe sat at a wooden table, wrists cuffed, beard ragged, gray eyes, once enough to make Calla tremble, now carrying a worn, vicious glint like a cornered beast. When he saw her, he let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Calla, heard you're living fine up north. As a housekeeper? Or something else for that man? His voice cut like broken glass. Calla stood firm. She thought she would shake, but she didn't. Her feet held. Her breath held. Maybe because Calder stood half a step behind her, silent, unmovable. Elias tilted his head, studying her. You've changed. Brave enough to look me in the eye. Calla answered, calm but not cold. I came to end what's between us. I want a divorce. Elias barked out another laugh. Without your help, they'll bury me in a cell. You owe me, Calla. I fed you, gave you my name. You never fed me. For the first time, Calla's voice hardened. You drained me. You used me to cover your debts, to patch the disasters you caused. Elias narrowed his eyes. A flash of malice flickered like desert lightning. You think the man behind you is better? He'll end up like me. Men always do. A woman like you brings out the worst in them. Before the words settled, Calder stepped forward, voice low but edged like a blade. That's enough. Only then did Elias truly look at him. Oh, the savior. White men do love their rescue fantasies. Calder didn't rise to the bait. His gaze cooled, turning dangerous, the look of a man who could break a threat without raising his voice. I'm here, he said, steady as stone, and she won't hear anything from you except your signature. Calla set the divorce papers on the table. Colorado allowed divorces in special circumstances. She only needed Elias's signature. Sign it, Calla said. I won't let you drag me down anymore. Elias looked between her and Calder, then exhaled, a crooked smile sliding across his face. Fine, he said. But you'll help me. A letter saying you weren't involved. I sign. You smooth things out. Calder turned to Calla, letting the choice be hers. She nodded. I'll write it. Not for you, for me. To close this. Elias scoffed, but he signed. The pen strokes were sharp, almost tearing the page. Calla folded the document, thanked the guard, and walked out. She did not look back. She no longer needed to. When the jail doors closed behind them, Calla felt her legs loosen beneath her. She stopped on the stone steps, hands trembling, breath uneven. Years of fear, years of living inside the shadow Elias cast, rose and broke apart all at once. Calder set a hand on her shoulder, feather light. You did well. The simple words shattered the last wall inside her. Calla broke into tears, deep, unguarded, the kind that come from someone who has just walked out of a burning house and realized they survived. Calder drew her into his arms, not rushing, not claiming, only holding her together when her strength gave way. His arms wrapped around her, warm and sure, like Northwind Valley itself had opened to take her in. Calla pressed her face to his chest, her tears soaking the thick fabric of his coat. Calder lowered his head and brushed a quiet kiss against her hair, a gesture that could no longer hide what he felt. In that embrace, Calla knew Elias belonged to the past. Calder was her present, and she was no longer afraid of the dark. Denver that morning wore a thin veil of white. Snow fell in silence, each flake drifting down like a fragile scrap of paper settling on the rooftops. Calla walked beside Calder, her heart lighter after facing Elias, yet strangely hollow, as if, after shedding the armor she'd carried for years, she hadn't yet learned how to breathe without its weight. Calder walked slower than usual, making sure she never felt pressed to match his pace. They said nothing for a long stretch, listening only to the horses and the quiet crunch of snow beneath their boots. Denver's cold, though sharp, felt gentler than when they had first arrived. Perhaps the darkness she had feared for so long now finally stood where it belonged, behind her. When they reached the small square near the station, Calder stopped. "Calla," he said, his voice so steady and calm she lifted her head at once. She saw snow collecting on his coat, each flake melting slow, as if time wanted to linger. "Are you cold?" he asked. "No," she said, smiling without meaning to. "The snow is beautiful." Calder looked at her, not at the snow. "It is, truly." There was something in his gaze, a green light she had grown used to seeing from afar, now close enough she could almost hear the beat of his heart. He drew a quiet breath, as though releasing something long held. And in that moment, Calder Wright stepped toward her, unhurried, unafraid of refusal, like a man who had found his destination. Then he knelt. Right there on the snow-covered street, with people hurrying past and cold wind sweeping through like a pale song. Calla froze, hands trembling before she could stop them. "Calder?" He looked up at her, honesty so clear in his eyes it needed no decoration, no speech rehearsed. "Calla," he said, voice steady despite the cold touching his lips. "I won't apologize for loving you too quickly." Calla's heart shifted, light and unsteady. Wind brushed the loose hair across her forehead, but she didn't lift a hand. Something in her knew she needed to stand still, to receive every word he was about to say. Calder went on, holding her gaze. "I choose you. Not because of circumstance. Not out of pity, I choose you. Because my heart knows its way home." It wasn't a proclamation. It wasn't a grand promise. It was a truth he had carried for a long time, finally spoken aloud. Calla looked at the man kneeling in the snow. In one beat, everything she once feared, being abandoned, being seen as unworthy, being measured against someone else's past, melted away like frost in sunlight. Her voice shook. "I never thought someone would choose me like this." Calder tilted his head slightly. "Calla, you don't have to be worthy of anything. You only need to believe you belong to yourself. The rest, leave to me." That was the final thread cutting free the doubt inside her. Calla reached out, her hand, once trembling from fear, now steady, and placed it in his. "Yes," she said, without hesitation. "I will." Calder closed his fingers around hers, rose and pulled her into his arms. Not the embrace of a storm shelter, nor the comfort outside a prison cell, but the hold of a man who intended to walk with her to the end of the road. Snow thickened around them, as if the heavens wished to slow down and witness two souls, shaped by different shadows, finding the same light. They returned to Northwind Valley the next afternoon. When the familiar wooden roof of the ranch came into view, Calla felt something shift. This place was no longer only where she worked, or where he had taken her in. It was becoming their home. Calder reined in near the porch, turning toward Calla with a brief smile warmer than any fire. "We've got much to prepare," he said. "The house, the wedding, our new life." Calla looked out across the golden valley, where the evening wind glided like a quiet stream, and for the first time she thought, her life was no longer shaped by the past, but by what she chose in the present. The afternoon light in Northwind Valley that day looked as if it had been poured through honey. Sunlit bands leaned across the barley fields, turning them into soft ripples of gold. Just enough warmth for a ceremony the small community would remember for years. The wedding of Calder Wright and Calla Monroe. There were no bright garlands, no loud music, no lavish clothes. But everyone present knew this was not a day that needed grandeur. It needed sincerity. Calder stood by the line of old pines, where the pastor had set up a wooden arch trimmed with sprigs of lavender Martha had gathered that morning. He wore a crisp white shirt and a charcoal vest. But what set him apart was not his attire. It was the calm warmth in his eyes, the look of a man who had found something people search a lifetime for. The crowd hushed as Calla stepped out. She wore the dress Martha had sewn by hand, soft ivory, light as mist, simple yet beautiful enough to tighten a throat. Calla's brown skin glowed under the late sun, gentle yet strong, like land that had taken storms and still bloomed in its season. She walked slowly across the grass, veil drifting in the breeze. The ranch hands, the neighbors, Evan's family, the shopkeepers of Northwind Hollow, all smiled and nodded at her. They had witnessed every change in her, from the quiet, guarded woman who arrived with trembling breath to the woman now walking forward with a lifted heart. Calder stared at her, forgetting to breathe. When Calla reached him, he held out his hand. She placed hers in his, and in that instant, it felt as though the valley stilled. His hand was large, warm, steady. Hers was smaller, softer, no longer shaking. Their hands together dissolved the last traces of doubt inside her. The pastor began. Wind brushed the lavender sprigs, sending a faint scent drifting between them. "Calder Wright," he said. "Do you promise to care for, honor, and walk beside Calla Monroe, as partner, as companion, as a part of your own heart?" Calder did not look away from her. "I do." It wasn't loud, wasn't rushed, just firm, like a vow written into bone. "Calla Monroe," the pastor said, turning to her, "do you promise to trust, to share, and to build a peaceful home with Calder Wright, in sunlight and storm, in good days and hard ones?" Calla lifted her gaze. "I do." Her voice did not shake. It carried the quiet certainty she once believed she would never possess. "From this moment," the pastor said, "you are husband and wife before God and this community." Applause broke out, first a crack, then rolling through the crowd. Martha wiped tears with the corner of her apron. Evan grinned over his crutch. The ranch hands clapped each other's backs in their rough, joyful way. Calder turned to Calla. His eyes held nothing he needed to hide anymore. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded. Calder leaned in and kissed her in the gold light. It wasn't the tentative kiss from the storm shelter. Not the comforting kiss from outside the jail. It was a vow. Slow, sure, proud, as if telling the world, "This is the woman I love. This is the woman I choose, and I will choose her in every life I'm given." When they parted, Calla opened her eyes, her chest full of something she had never named before. Belonging. Not belonging to Calder, not bound to the ranch, but belonging to a place she had built in her heart. With trust, she grew herself and the kindness of those who welcomed her. She looked at the valley, the wooden farmhouse, the smiling community, and for the first time in many years, her eyes did not search for an exit. She had found home, and this time it was truly hers. The years in Northwind Valley did not rush nor roar. They moved quietly, like the small stream running past the ranch, changing color with each season. The pale green of spring, the honey gold of summer, the brick red of autumn, and the soft white of winter. Under Calla and Calder's care, the ranch grew into the heart of the valley, steady, fair, and warm. Calla kept the ledgers, managed expenses, organized harvests, and oversaw the workers. Folks said that anyone who watched her arrange the granaries or divide the rations could tell she laid the firmest foundation Northwind had ever known. Calder still watched the fields, worked the timber, studied the land. But if anyone asked why the ranch had prospered so well, he only smiled and said, "Because of her." Everyone at the ranch knew he meant Calla. 2 children grew up in the wind-carved valley, a boy and a girl. Both carried rare green eyes, the color of spring after thaw, and the quiet steadiness they inherited from Calder. Elias, the elder, loved hearing his mother tell stories of Echo Ridge and the contract auction he still couldn't quite understand. Anna, 2 years younger, loved watching Calla write in her journal each afternoon, dipping her small fingers into the ink and dotting the pages in ways that made Martha laugh all day. Calla let them sit on the kitchen floor while she wrote and told stories. "I write so I remember what we've come through," she said. "Not to ache again, but to know how far we've come." The children nodded, too young to grasp it, yet watching her with wonder. Every year, on the anniversary of the contract auction, Calla spent the afternoon writing. At first, Calder thought it was a kind of healing. With time, he understood it was a ritual, her way of reminding herself that once she had been treated as something to be bartered, but now she owned her life, and built a home where laughter filled the wooden walls. The pages held pain, but never bitterness. Only truth and renewal. Calder respected that. He never read unless she offered, and on the evenings she handed him a page. He sat beside her on the porch steps, placing his hand over hers without a word. Silence, too, could be a form of love. One late summer afternoon, as sunlight slanted beneath the eaves and the barley fields carried the soft scent of earth, Calla stood on the porch. Inside, the children's laughter rang like music. Outside, the horses grazed lazily in the yard. Peace settled so deeply she felt her heartbeat slow to match it. Calder came up behind her, quiet as a shift of wind. He stood beside her, keeping a small, warm distance. Evening air brushed Calla's cheek, carrying the first cool hint of autumn. "What are you thinking?" Calder asked. Calla looked out toward the fields, her face calm but thoughtful. "I'm thinking about the first day you saw me. I never imagined I'd stand here one day." Calder was silent for a long moment, as Jonathan, though allowing the old memory to drift back to them. Then he said, low and steady, "That day I only meant to save someone. I didn't know I'd find my whole life." Calla turned toward him, dark eyes shining like a deep, warm well. She leaned against his shoulder, not because she needed support, but because it was where she wanted to stand. "And I," she whispered, "finally know what it means to be chosen. Not chosen out of pity, not chosen out of obligation. Chosen as the equal heartbeat of a love that had learned to mend itself." Evening wind swept over them, soft as an unseen hand on the rooftop. In that moment, Northwind Valley was no longer just land. It was the legacy of a love, born from pain, kept through kindness, and blossoming in the slow, steady way of 2 people who learned first to love themselves, then each other. If this story stirs a memory or touches something in your heart, feel free to share your thoughts below. Your reflections are a blessing that keeps these stories alive. And if you've enjoyed walking this journey with me, please don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and join me for the stories yet to come. Wishing you a gentle, warm evening.